Would you believe it if I told you that a dog woke up your family seconds before a gas explosion, and that thanks to him, everyone escaped with their lives from a tragedy that destroyed the whole house? It sounds like a movie scene, but what you will discover now is a real, intense and exciting story. And maybe after listening to her, you will never look at your dog in the same way again. Think for a moment. How many times have you heard that dogs have a sixth sense? That they perceive things that we humans simply cannot grasp? From omens to invisible pressures, from small signs to impending catastrophes, there is something almost supernatural about this connection between dogs and their owners. Have you ever been through it? That moment when your dog barks, runs, or insists on getting your attention for no apparent reason? Well, in some cases, this can be much more than a tantrum or a mania. It could literally be a survival alert. Now imagine the scene. Silent dawn. Everyone sleeps soundly. The city outside follows its rhythm, but inside the house reigns quiet. Until a smell imperceptible to the family begins to spread, gas leaking, invading every room, turning that home into a time bomb about to explode. No one notices. No one except a dog. Stay with me until the end, because this story will move you. This dog not only sensed the danger but decided to act. He ran from room to room, barked, pushed doors, scratched sheets, insisted in every way until he woke up every person in the house. At first, everyone was surprised. Who has never complained about the restless dog in the middle of the night? But what seemed only restlessness turned out to be the desperate cry of a four-legged hero. And moments after the family managed to get out, the explosion engulfed the place, reducing the house to rubble. What you will discover now may surprise you. Science has been studying canine sensitivity to gases, fires, natural disasters, and even subtle changes in the human body for years. There are documented cases of dogs that warned of seizures before they happened, that detected cancer only by smell, and that sensed earthquakes before any tremor. But in this particular case, it wasn't just science. It was instinct, love, and loyalty in its purest form. And that is precisely what makes these stories so remarkable, because we're not just talking about a pet. We are talking about a silent protector, an attentive guardian, who often risks everything to save those he loves. Have you ever stopped to think about how much your dog observes you, your habits, your sounds, your movements, and even your emotions? It is as if they are always on alert, always ready to intervene. This story goes beyond survival. She talks about trust, about bonding, and about the strength of an invisible bond that has united humans and dogs since the dawn of mankind. What you'll hear from now on isn't just another tale of canine heroism. It is an invitation to reflect on the greatness hidden in seemingly simple gestures, and on how sometimes life offers us angels disguised as four-legged companions. Get ready, because this is just the beginning. In the next few minutes, you will get to know the details of this unbelievable scene, feel the tension of that moment, and understand why this story has become such a powerful example of love, courage, and animal instinct. And perhaps as you listen to this story, something inside you will also remember a similar scene. A moment when your dog acted unexpectedly, as if he wanted to warn you of something, or simply stood by your side in a difficult situation, conveying a calm that no one else could. If this topic makes sense to you, leave here in the comments what touched you the most so far, or share some experience of yours. It may be that your story also inspires others who are going through similar situations. And since we are in this conversation together, your gesture of liking the video makes all the difference, so that more people know stories like this. It's something simple for you, but powerful for the reach of that message. Just like subscribing to the channel. When you subscribe, you show that you want to continue following this type of content, and that is precisely what motivates me to bring more and more reports and reflections that connect, excite, and make you think. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who, just like you, believe that these stories are not just about dogs, but about love, courage, and the strength of bonds that transform lives. So, if you are with me so far, take advantage of this moment. Comment, leave your like, and subscribe. It's a way to show that this message resonates with you too, and to strengthen this community that values so much the unique relationship between humans and their four-legged companions. And while you do that, stick with me, because you still have so much more of this story to reveal. It was early morning in a small town in the United States. Those silent streets, lit only by a few spaced poles, carried the sense of security and routine. Inside a simple house with light walls and a yard surrounded by a wooden fence already worn by time, everything seemed quiet. The clock was ticking slowly, as if the night was endless. The family rested deeply, each in his room, lulled by common dreams and without imagining that fate prepared a shock capable of transforming forever the memory of that night. The kitchen, still with traces of dinner, kept dishes in the sink and a light smell of food that mixed with something imperceptible to the human nose. The gas that little by little leaked silently. There was no noise, no sign of danger. It was as if the house was breathing calmly, hiding behind its scenes a hidden truth that would only be revealed in the following moments. The family dog, a medium-sized, watchful-eyed animal, seemed to be the only one to notice that something wasn't right. While everyone was asleep, he restlessly circled the halls, sniffing the air, raising his ears as if trying to decipher invisible signals. It is curious how these small gestures, which often go unnoticed, can carry the weight of a decision capable of changing entire destinies. The transformation of that night began right there, at the instant when a dog's instinct went beyond the limits of what we call logic. He did not need scientific explanations. There were no calculations, only a deep, almost spiritual feeling that something was about to happen. This is the part that makes us reflect. How many times do we ourselves ignore the signs around us because we are stuck in the rush of day-to-day distractions, obligations? And yet, that dog did not ignore. He decided to act. Suddenly, he went to the younger child's room, scratched the door, barked low, insisted. Then he ran up to the couple, jumped on the bed, pulled the cover with his teeth in unusual desperation. It wasn't just anxiety, it was urgency. This unexpected behavior first aroused irritation after all. Who would not be surprised to be woken up at dawn for no apparent reason? But in a matter of seconds, irritation turned into alertness. The dog's look was different. The body tense, breathing quickened. It was as if he was begging everyone to understand what was happening. The hidden truth behind that peaceful dawn began to reveal itself. The mother, still sleepy, smelled a faint, strange smell in the air. But before she was even sure, the dog was already leading everyone out of the room, pushing, running ahead, stopping to make sure they were following. That wasn't just a knee-jerk reaction. It was a demonstration of loyalty and courage in its purest form. This episode prompts us to reflect on the impact of the small choices we make. Think about it. How often do we underestimate a detail, a sensation, an intuition? In the case of that family, if they had ignored the signs, the story would have had a tragic outcome. But the decision to rely on the dog's behavior was what ensured that everyone could leave on time. This is a powerful revelation. Often salvation lies in realizing and acting on that which seems too small to matter. That night's journey carries lessons that go beyond the fact itself. It reminds us that behind the scenes in life, there are always forces at work in ways we can't fully see. Animal instinct, keen perception, silent courage. All this composed a scene that could have ended in destruction, but turned into rebirth. Because from a house reduced to rubble, a new mindset has emerged. That life can change in seconds, and that attention to seemingly banal details can be the difference between tragedy and hope. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when we talk about transformation, we're not just talking about a prevented explosion or a destroyed home. We are talking about how critical moments reveal the essence of each, and in this case, the essence of an animal that did not know words, but expressed love in the form of courage. What does it mean, after all, to be willing to put yourself between danger and those you love? This question echoes not only in this dog's story, but in our own journey as human beings. And perhaps the most impressive thing is to realize how these episodes mess with the mentality of the people who experience them. After escaping the tragedy, the family not only rebuilt the house, but also rebuilt values. They began to look at that dog not only as a playmate, but as a real guardian. This shift in perspective shows the profound impact a single event can have, transforming the way we view life, how we make decisions, and how we interpret signals that once seemed irrelevant. With every detail, it becomes clearer that stories like this are not just about heroic animals. They are mirrors of our own vulnerability and the strength we find in bonds we often underestimate. Behind the scenes of an ordinary evening, a dog showed that courage does not need words, only action. And it is precisely this revelation that connects us. understanding that we all carry, at some level, this call to act when something is at risk. And when we think of impact, it is impossible not to consider the effect that this type of experience causes on people's mentality. After surviving something so intense, hardly anyone is the same again. There is an invisible transformation, silent but deeply real. The family of that small town learned firsthand that there is no absolute security, that life is fragile, and that at the same time there are forces capable of protecting us in the most unlikely moments. This learning generates a change in behavior, more attention to everyday life, more appreciation of small gestures, more gratitude for what seemed too obvious to be noticed, because deep down, that's what it's all about. The decisions we make in the face of the unexpected. They shape not only the immediate results, but the entire journey that follows. Now imagine the following scene: the sun rising over the wreckage of the house, neighbors approaching, firefighters assessing the damage. In the midst of chaos, the family gathered, embraced, alive, and next to them, the dog, panting, with fur marked by the tension of the night but with firm eyes as if who knows exactly what he did. This image sums up something that words can hardly translate: the sheer courage, the unconditional loyalty, and the impact that only those who were there could understand in its entirety. That's the beauty of the revelations that come in the darkest moments. They remind us that there is always something bigger at stake, even when we don't realize it. There is always an instinct, a force, a hidden truth that, if we pay attention, can lead us away from danger and closer to what really matters. And before we go any further, I want to propose something quick. Comment there. This makes sense to me. So we create together this space of exchange and reflection, where every word becomes part of a community that values stories of transformation, courage, and real impact. Without anyone noticing, a gas leak was beginning to spread through the house. He made no noise, had no color, did not attract anyone's attention. It just moved forward, silent, like an invisible enemy waiting for the right moment to strike. With each passing second, the air grew heavier, more dangerous, turning what seemed to be a safe home into a deadly trap about to explode. It is frightening to think that what threatens our life often does not present itself in an obvious way, but rather hidden, acting under the cloths, as a hidden truth that only reveals itself when it is already too late. The gas seeped into the walls, filled every crack, mixed with oxygen, and settled behind the scenes of that seemingly quiet night. It was as if a toxic cloud formed in the invisible, waiting for only a little human carelessness to become lethal. The family, thrown into a deep sleep, breathed without suspecting the invisible poison that spread around them. Danger was in no hurry. He knew that in a few minutes it would take a spark, a flick of a switch, or even the lighting of a candle to turn that entire house to ash. The impact would be devastating: walls crumbling, windows shattering, lives being cut short in the blink of an eye. It is curious how life sometimes organizes itself in such a fragile way. We trust the space we call home as if it were invincible. The routine of lying down and sleeping in peace conveys a sense of almost absolute security. But this trust can be destroyed in seconds when invisible forces decide to manifest themselves. That's the most disturbing part. The enemy didn't announce his arrival. He hid, waiting for the moment to turn rest into tragedy. This contrast between tranquility and menace shows us how our journey can change in an instant, how seemingly small decisions can carry a huge weight. As the gas spread, the family dog remained on alert. His body seemed to pick up on something humans couldn't: the watchful eyes, the quick strides from room to room, the panting breath. Everything about him revealed a silent struggle against something that had no form yet. He couldn't explain what was happening, but he felt it. And this sensitivity is what differentiates animal instincts from human rationality. While we seek explanations, they act. And at that moment, action was the only thing that could save lives. The dog sniffed the air, raised his head, stopped in front of the doors. He walked in circles, restless, as if trying to warn someone that the silence of the house hid a real danger. And here's a thought-provoking detail. How many times in our own lives do clear signs pop up before us that we choose to ignore because they seem too small? How many times does instinct scream, but logic tells you to shut up? Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because when looking at this scene, we are not just talking about a gas leak. We are faced with a powerful metaphor about the invisible dangers that also exist in our own lives. Situations that seem harmless, but that, little by little, accumulate until they become unsustainable. Toxic relationships that wear down the soul in silence, delayed decisions that erode the future, truths we choose to ignore because facing them hurts too much, responsibilities that we push with the hope that they will disappear on their own. Just like the gas in that house, these elements spread slowly without attracting attention until the moment they explode and change everything irreversibly. How often do we fail to hear the silent warning that life gives us? Sometimes it is an internal discomfort, an intuition, a feeling that something is not right, but we prefer to move on, as if nothing is happening. It is in this carelessness that danger finds space. The family that night was vulnerable because they relied on silence and the appearance of normalcy. This confidence, however natural, can blind us to what is really going on behind the scenes. The dog, on the other hand, teaches us that mindfulness can be the difference between life and death. He didn't ignore how he felt. He didn't rationalize. He didn't settle. He didn't choose to wait. He acted. And action is the bridge that separates tragedy from transformation. This leads us to a deep reflection. How many situations in our journey could have been different if we had paid attention to these invisible signs? Had we chosen to act before it was too late? This story is a reminder that life is full of invisible enemies, some as lethal as the gas that escaped in that kitchen. They can be hidden in habits that harm us, in choices we don't make, in fears that paralyze us, but they also show us that there is always a way out, a possible path, if we are willing to recognize these signs and make decisions before the pressure becomes unbearable. And here's how it echoes in so many areas of life. An ignored debt can become an unbearable burden. An unspoken word can turn a relationship into ruins. A neglected symptom can turn into serious illness. Invisible danger is treacherous precisely because it disguises itself as normality. While everyone believes that everything is fine, he moves forward. And when it finally reveals itself, it is often already too late to avoid the impact. But in that house there was someone willing to defy that deadly silence. There was an attentive guardian who turned instinct into action. This is the detail that changes everything, recognizing that on any journey, no matter how dark or quiet the scenery, there is always something or someone who can see what others cannot. The dog knew it couldn't wait. He clapped his paws, growled softly, scratched doors as if to say, "Wake up, time is running out." This behavior, which could be mistaken for agitation, was actually a cry for help, a desperate cry for the family to realize what was happening. And it was this insistence that changed the course of history. It is at this point that we understand the value of small signals. The insistent look of the dog, the restless walking along the corridors, the touch of the paw scratching at the door, all this could have been ignored, but it was exactly the opposite. Every gesture became a revelation, a hidden message translated into courage. And this courage has opened space for a greater transformation, for a truth that only reveals itself in moments of crisis. Now imagine what it would be like if this alert had gone unnoticed. The explosion would have been inevitable. The story would have ended in mourning, in silence, in pain. The impact of a single decision, whether to believe that guardian or not, was the line that separated life from death. How often, in our own choices, does this line also not present itself, thin and barely noticeable, but absolutely decisive? Thanks to the decision to trust the dog's instinct, that family's journey has moved on. They woke up, understood, acted. The invisible enemy was still there, but he was defeated before the tragedy was consummated. And this shows us that no matter how invisible the danger may seem, there is always an opportunity to act before it becomes fatal. This scene is more than a dramatic account. It is an invitation to look within, to realize what are the invisible dangers that may be haunting our own lives. It may be something small, but which, if ignored, can explode into gigantic consequences. The world is full of these risks masquerading as routine, and what sets the course of our journey is whether we choose to face these signs as irrelevant nuisances or as revelations that require attitude. The question remains, are we attentive enough to recognize these signs? Are we ready to act when instinct or intuition calls us? Are we willing to turn discomfort into decision, doubt into movement, hesitation into action? This is the mentality that saves, that protects, that transforms. And to mark this reflection together, write there in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." I want to see who here also believes that even invisible danger can turn into learning when we choose to see beyond the surface. The buildup of gas was taking on alarming proportions, even though no one inside the house was fully aware of it. Every passing second felt like a silent pact with fate, as if time had decided to play with human frailty. The air was no longer the same. There was an invisible weight hanging over the rooms, a density barely noticeable to any ordinary person, but lethal enough to turn that night into an unprecedented tragedy. It was as if the whole house had turned into a powder keg, ready to explode at the slightest sign of carelessness. It would only take a lit switch, the lighting of a candle, or even the internal spark of some appliance for everything to fall apart in seconds. The clock, hanging on the living room wall, seemed to run against the life of the family. His hands moved forward coldly, without emotion, indifferent to the tension that was building up invisibly. The constant ticking was like a cruel reminder that life, as safe as it may seem, is always at the mercy of forces we don't control. The countdown was not visible, but it was in progress. Gas, this colorless and silent enemy, was in no hurry. I was just waiting for the inevitable moment. In the room, the child changed his position, breathing deeply, not imagining that the air filling his lungs carried the risk of being the last. The father, still in a deep sleep, turned over, unconscious that every movement was accompanied by the threat that the slightest wrong gesture might set off the fatal spark. The mother, in turn, dreamed, not suspecting that such a dream could be abruptly interrupted, replaced by the deafening rumble of an explosion. The only one who didn't sleep was the dog. His body was on full alert. He walked back and forth, sniffed intensely, returned to the room, went to the door, went down a few steps. The restlessness grew like an inner flame, an urgency that only he seemed to understand. The fixed eyes, the raised ears, the quickened breathing. It was as if the whole organism of the animal was a natural sensor, catching the hidden truth that no one else was able to perceive. At every step he seemed to calculate what to do, how to act, how to convey the message that time was running out. This contrast between the apparent peace of the family and the quiet despair of the dog is a powerful portrait of real life. How many times have we walked quietly through scenarios that seem stable, but that hide latent risks? How often do we rely too much on fragile structures, on postponed choices, on harmful habits, until everything accumulates and suddenly the impact becomes inevitable? The imminence of tragedy is almost always invisible until it becomes too late. Now I want to go even deeper into that subject, because what was about to happen in that house is also a mirror of our own journeys. The gas that spread is the metaphor for the problems we choose to ignore, debts that slowly increase, resentments that accumulate in family silences, hidden truths that weigh on the heart, decisions that we postpone because we prefer the comfort of inertia. All this mixes invisibly, like an enemy that does not need to show itself to dominate us. Until one day, all it takes is a spark, a tiny detail, and everything implodes. It is curious how the human mind becomes accustomed to danger when it is slow and gradual. If there was an immediate explosion, everyone would realize the gravity. But when the threat comes disguised as normality, it is common to ignore it. And this is the trap. We believe that because yesterday nothing happened, today also nothing will happen. But the truth is that the clock does not stop. The countdown runs its course, whether we are attentive or not. The dog, however, shows us another mentality. He did not allow himself to be deceived by the appearance of calm. He recognized the danger behind the scenes, in the subtle details, and decided to act. The great revelation here is that often the act of saving requires neither words nor incontrovertible proof. It requires confidence in instinct. It requires courage to move against inertia. It was that instinct that began to write a new page for that family before they even woke up. Inside the house, every object seemed charged with tension. The closed but not completely stove was the epicenter of the threat. The corridor lamp, silent, was one step away from becoming a detonator. Even the simple gesture of pulling the bedroom switch would have been enough to turn that night into a devastating memory. The fate of the family was about to be decided not in the distant future, but in the next few minutes. And what makes the difference in those moments is who is willing to act before it's too late. Think about it. How many times have you yourself been faced with a situation where everything seemed under control, but deep down there were signs that it was not? How often do we ignore symptoms, alerts, intuitions, because it is easier to believe in stability than to face the possibility of crisis? The invisible gas from that house reminds us that life can change quietly, without fanfare, until the final crack manifests itself. The emotional impact of understanding this scene is inevitable, because it is not just about a family at risk, but about the representation of how we all deal with the invisible dangers that surround us. The difference is in listening or not listening to the warning, in acting or waiting, in trusting or hesitating. And this is the point that transforms the course of the journey. At that moment, the life of the family was suspended, as if on a delicate scale. On the one hand, the illusory normality, on the other, the impending tragedy. The clock continued its impassive march, each tick marking the approach of possible disaster. But there was, amid all that quiet scenery, a tireless guardian, determined not to let the worst happen. And this is the strongest revelation. While danger seemed to triumph through invisibility, there was also latent courage, ready to manifest. And that's what turns stories of tragedy into stories of transformation. The gas was real, the threat was real, but so was the possibility of winning, of resisting, of rewriting the outcome before it was too late. And to mark this reflection together, he comments there, "This makes sense to me. I want to see how many people also realize that even in the face of the imminence of a tragedy, there are always signs and paths that can transform the end of history." The family dog, until then lying at the foot of the bed as in every night, suddenly raised its head. His eyes shone in the gloom, attentive to something that no one else noticed. The silence of the house to him was not so silent. There was a tension in the air, a strange density that ran through his body like an invisible electric current. The sharp nose detected particles that escaped humans, and their instincts screamed that something wasn't right. He got up, walked around the room with quick strides, went back to the bedside, then went to the door. Restless, agitated, he seemed to be trying to find a way to translate into actions what he could not say in words. The animal's breathing quickened. The chest rose and fell in a nervous rhythm. He stopped in front of the bed again, brought his muzzle closer to the owner's face, as if trying to blow the alert in his direction. The father, however, remained trapped in heavy sleep, unaware of the risk that surrounded them. The mother would roll over in quiet dreams, perhaps not imagining that her life was hanging by a thread. The dog looked at both of them, took a step back and let out a low, short, almost restrained bark. Quiet. He tried again, this time louder. The ears moved, but no one woke up. Then he scratched the door hard, trying to provoke some noise that was impossible to ignore. The father grumbled, turned on his side, annoyed by the movement, and muttered something meaningless. For him, it seemed just an ordinary night bustle, maybe even a request for attention. Little did he know that this call was not a whim, but a plea for urgency, a desperate plea for someone to understand the gravity of what was coming. Meanwhile, time passed. The gas had already taken over the living room, the kitchen, and was moving up the corridor towards the bedrooms. Invisible, merciless, he awaited the crack of the spark that would seal the fate of all. The clock attached to the wall kept the compass cold, indifferent to the tragedy that could explode at any moment. Each tick was a silent countdown, a cruel reminder that the end might be minutes away. The dog, as if knowing that time was against them, abandoned the attempt to bark and began to act more intensely. He ran to the child's room, scratched at the door, barked incessantly, ran back to the couple, jumped on the bed, pulled the sheet with his teeth, shook his head, insisted. The restlessness increased. The whole body vibrated in despair. His instincts, trained by nature itself, did not allow inertia. There, behind the scenes at dawn, one of the most important decisions of that family's journey was unfolding, to believe or not in the strangeness of animal behavior. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what we see here is not just the story of a dog that sensed a danger. It is living proof of how in many moments our salvation can come from the most unexpected signs, from those that defy logic and invite us to see life with a different mindset. The dog did not need scientific evidence, measurements, or external confirmations. He just knew. And this instinctual certainty is something that we humans often lose amid excessive rationality. Think about it. How many times have you ignored an intuition because it seemed too absurd? How many times has a gut feeling turned out to be true after you've dismissed it? How many times has an uncomfortable feeling tried to alert you, but you preferred to cling to the comfort of normalcy? This story puts us in front of an uncomfortable revelation. Too much logic can blind us to hidden truths that can only be perceived in another way. Transformation happens when we learn to balance reason and instinct, science and sensitivity, logic and intuition. The dog became that night the protagonist of a narrative that seemed to be doomed to the worst. His strength was not in size, nor in voice, nor in any material tool. It was in the courage to act when no one else dared, in the ability to insist when everyone remained blind, in the commitment to protect, even without having the guarantee that it would be heard. This detail carries an immense impact. Often the difference between life and tragedy is in what we cannot explain, but that we feel intensely. The animal went back and forth around the room like a tireless watchman. It growled low, dragged its paws along the floor, climbed back on the bed and pushed its body against the owners, as if trying to pull them out of inertia. There was no rest. There was no pause. Every gesture was a desperate attempt to save. And this calling was not only physical, it was almost spiritual. It was as if that morning life had chosen that dog as the messenger of a warning that could not be ignored. Meanwhile, the gas pressure increased. Invisible molecules accumulated in the curtains, in the carpets, in the sheets. At any moment, fate could change dramatically. But the dog stood firm, carrying in itself the responsibility that no human in that house was capable of assuming. It was a guardian, fighting an invisible enemy, a four-legged warrior facing, alone, the imminence of tragedy. The transformation that was about to take place would not only be physical, but also mental. Because when this family really woke up, it wouldn't just be to escape an explosion. It would be to realize that there are forces acting around us that cannot be explained by reason alone. Forces that reveal hidden truths, that teach us about trust, about invisible bonds, and about the impact of seemingly small decisions. This is a crucial point. In how many situations in life have we ignored the barking that insists on getting our attention? This barking can take many forms: a pain we don't treat, a conversation we avoid, a change we postpone, a nuisance we pretend not to feel. He always seems inopportune, bothersome, almost irrelevant, but in retrospect we realized it was the only voice trying to save us. The dog in that family didn't know anything about gas, but he knew there was danger. In the same way, we may not know how to explain certain annoyances, but we can learn to respect them. The clock continued its cold march, but the dog did not give up. He was the resistance against inertia, the voice against silence, the movement against the approaching destiny. Every second that passed was a new chance to hear the warning that insisted on manifesting itself. History was about to take its turn, and what was at stake was not only survival, but a transformation that would forever mark the memory of that night. And before we go any further, I want to leave a mark on that moment. Comment there. That makes sense to me. I want to see who also believes that instincts can reveal hidden truths that save lives. The dog, seized with increasing restlessness, no longer restrained himself. He began to run from room to room, as if instinct told him that every second of delay was a risk, that there would be no time for anything. The sound of his paws against the floor echoed through the silent corridor, interrupting the quiet of the dawn. He barked loudly without long pauses, as if each bark was a cry translated into urgency. It was a call that came from within, something that is not explained, but that is felt on the skin like an invisible force pressing the soul to act. First, he went to the child's room. He scratched the door hard, growled softly, and then barked loudly, insistently, until the noise echoed beyond the walls. The nails scratched the wood, leaving marks that would later become vivid memories of that moment. The little one, still given over to sleep, just fidgets, not understanding the turmoil. The dog insisted, barked again, banged his paws on the door as if he wanted to knock it down. Then he ran to his parents' room, jumped on the bed with a decided jump, pulled the sheet with his teeth, crawled across the owner's chest, poked with his paws. There was no more room for shyness. He knew that everyone's life was in the hands of his persistence. With each unsuccessful attempt, he redoubled his efforts, ran again, barked again. The hair bristled, the breathing quickened, the whole body vibrated in despair. He wasn't just a dog on alert, He was a warrior in silent combat against an invisible enemy. The despair in the barks reverberated through the walls like echoes of a prophetic warning. The sound, to those who heard it from the outside, might seem exaggerated, but inside that house it carried a clear meaning. Wake up, the danger is here. Mom was the first to move. She opened her eyes slowly, disturbed by the noise, and met the dog's fixed gaze, almost pleading. It was not the look of an animal asking for affection or food. It was a look charged with tension, as if to say, "Get up now, something terrible is happening." It was a look that transcended the barrier between species and became a universal language, the language of urgency. The father still resisted, grumbling about the nuisance, trying to ignore the scene. But the dog would not stop. He insisted, pushed with his body, pulled the blanket, growled louder. The feeling was that he was literally trying to rouse them from sleep, as if he knew that every prolonged instant in that room was a risky negotiation with fate. The child woke up scared, whining when he heard the noise. The sound of barking was too loud to be mistaken for anything ordinary. When the mother got up and opened the door, the dog ran up to her, barked even louder, ran back into the hall, stopped in front of the stairs and looked back, waiting for them to accompany him. He was conducting the rescue, plotting an escape route that no one else understood. It was as if he had taken on the role of a guide, not just a protector. His movements were calculated. Each bark was a command, each pause was an invitation to follow him. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because this scene doesn't just talk about a dog trying to save his family. She talks about the strength of insistence in the face of danger. How many times in our own lives does something repeatedly try to alert us, but we ignore it, believing that it is just noise? How often does the hidden truth appear in the form of persistent signs, insisting that we wake up before it's too late? The dog, that morning, embodied the very concept of insistence as a tool of transformation. He did not give up on the first ignored bark, nor on the second, nor on the 10th. He knew that if he stopped, the price would be priceless. This is an essential point. Life rarely changes with a single sign. She insists. It shows us patterns, repeats situations, puts before us the same mistakes until we finally understand. The dog would not shut up because he understood that only repetition could break through the barrier of inertia, and that's a powerful metaphor about mindset. Change requires persistence, both from the world trying to wake us up and from ourselves insisting on getting better. Behind the scenes of that dawn, barking became the guiding thread of survival. They carried not just sound, but emotion, courage, a desperation that translated into vital energy, and little by little, even the most resistant began to give in. The father got up slowly, still confused, trying to understand the reason for the agitation. The mother, already attentive to the abnormal behavior of the dog, held the child's hand, realizing that this was not just an outbreak of restlessness. It was something bigger, a warning that could not be ignored. The impact of this scene is profound because it reminds us that often we do not need to understand all the details to act. Sometimes we just need to rely on the signal strength. The dog could not explain in words, could not show concrete evidence, but his insistence was enough to indicate that something serious was about to happen, and trusting that instinct was the decision that made all the difference. The journey of transformation that unfolded in that house was invisible but powerful. An entire family was learning in a few minutes that there are hidden truths that cannot be measured, but only felt. That decisions don't have to be perfect, but they do need to be made. That life, at its rawest core, is made of quick choices in the face of insistent signals. The dog thus became an unlikely teacher, teaching with barking what books, theories, and logical reasoning often fail to show: the importance of acting before it is too late. How many important revelations do not come to us in the same way? A constant annoyance, a repetitive discomfort, an inner voice that does not shut up. They appear as the barks of life, asking us to pay attention. Ignoring them can be costly. The dog that night showed that survival is born from the ability to hear even what seems uncomfortable, and his persistence was the bridge between risk and salvation. As the family began to move, guided by the urgency of that guardian, the clock followed its cold compass, reminding them that time does not wait. It was the race between imminent destruction and the courage to act in time, and in that instant, the barking was the sound of resistance, the music that saved. They weren't just noises of despair, they were notes from a symphony of survival, a war chant against the deadly silence that gathered in the air. Barking echoed through the corridors like bells ringing in alarm. With each reverberation, the atmosphere changed, as if the walls of the house also understood that something was about to happen. The dog did not rest, did not slow down, did not give in to fatigue. It was a demonstration that, in the face of imminent danger, insistence can be the most powerful weapon there is. And to mark this moment together, he comments there, "I'm on this journey too. I want to see who also understands that life often warns us insistently until we awaken to transformation." The scene took a dramatic turn at the very moment when the parents, still immersed in the torpor of sleep, began to realize that there was something out of the ordinary. The silence of the dawn was no longer just silence. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible noise that seemed to vibrate in the air. The strong smell, previously masked by the calm of the night, began to seep through the nostrils, awakening a nuisance that could no longer be ignored. It was a heavy, cloying odor, laden with an invisible menace. The father, with a frown, raised his head from the bed, confused, rubbing his eyes in search of some logic for that strangeness. The mother, more aroused by the dog's insistence, held the child's hand and exchanged apprehensive glances. At that moment, the plug dropped. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. The dog could no longer disguise his agitation. It ran from side to side, barked louder, stopped in front of the main door and scratched so hard that its claws left marks on the wood. He had become a guide, a natural leader, as if he understood that every second of hesitation was a risky negotiation with death. The urgency stamped on the animal's every gesture was so clear that there was no room for doubt. The confusion took the house by storm in a matter of moments. The father, still trying to understand, muttered disconnected questions. "What's going on? Why is he like this?" But the answer was there, soaked in the air, suffocating, growing in intensity with each breath. The mother did not hesitate. She pulled the child by the arm, almost dragging him out of the room, while the dog ran ahead, barked, stopped, looked back, made sure that they were following. The corridor seemed narrower, longer, as if the house itself was trying to hold them in its walls. Each step was accompanied by the sound of barking, which echoed like a beacon in the darkness. The child cried, confused, her face hidden on her mother's shoulder. The father, already feeling the gravity of the situation, quickened his pace, his heart racing. The air, now impregnated with gas, became denser every second, burned in the nostrils, made breathing difficult. Fear, once only a vague sensation, was now concrete, almost palpable. When they reached the room, the dog stopped in front of the main door and barked desperately. He scratched the wood violently, as if trying to break through alone. It was like saying, "This way, now." Finally, the father understood. With a sudden gesture, he opened the door. The cold air of the early morning invaded the environment like an explosion of life. It was a refreshing breath, which contrasted with the invisible menace within the house. The dog was the first to cross the threshold, turned on himself, barked even louder, and turned his gaze to the family, encouraging them to follow him. They went, stumbling in a hurry almost without time to think. Escape chaos ensued. Neighbors, some awakened by the noise, opened windows without understanding the scene. The mother ran with the child in her arms, the father right behind, and the dog led them like a commander in the middle of the battlefield. The contrast was striking. On the one hand, the apparent safety of a sleeping house. On the other, the hidden truth of a lethal danger about to materialize. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this escape doesn't just represent a family escaping an impending disaster. It symbolizes the way life forces us, at certain moments, to break through the cocoon of illusion. How many times do we believe we are safe just because everything seems quiet on the surface? How often do we cling to the comfort of habit, to the illusory control of routine, while clear signs warn us that something is not right? The smell that invaded that house was more than gas. It was the metaphor of revelation that bothers, of truth that can no longer be drowned out. It exposed the fragility of life and reminded us that the control we believe we have is often only a fragile construct. The chaos of escape, as desperate as it was also an invitation to transformation. Because it is precisely in the extreme moments that we are torn from inertia and forced to decide whether we are going to stay or move forward. This scene shows us that life doesn't always have the luxury of waiting until we're ready. Life presses, demands quick decisions, charges, choices without guarantee. And it is in this unstable terrain that the greatest transformations take place. The dog knew, not in words but in instinct, that action was needed. He did not hesitate, did not retreat, did not allow fear to paralyze him. And that's a powerful lesson. Instinct, when paired with courage, can save us from fates we can't even imagine. Think about the times when you felt something wasn't right, but preferred to ignore it. In the times when reality insisted on showing you signs, but you called them exaggeration, coincidence, or even paranoia. What differentiates the family that survives from the one that succumbs is the willingness to hear this call and act in time. The dog did not just listen, he insisted until he was heard. The father, already awakened by the danger, closed the door behind him as if to close that chapter of terror. But the real revelation was only beginning. The mother, still panting, looked at the dog as if she saw in him not just an animal, but a guardian endowed with invisible wisdom. The child, even without understanding rationally, already felt the change that would mark that night forever. The chaos of the escape was not only the crossing of the door from the room to the street, it was the symbolic crossing from unconsciousness to consciousness, from sleep to awakening, from passivity to action. And that's something we all experience in different ways on our journeys. We are sometimes forced to run out of what we thought was safe, only to discover that this is where the greatest risk lies. The impact of this experience shapes the mindset. From that moment on, none of those people would look at the dog in the same way. None of them would ever step inside that house again without remembering what might have happened. Because true transformation does not happen when everything is under control, but when we are faced with the revelation that we have never been totally sure. This is the frame of life that few count. Discomfort is often the prelude to change, and those who learn to interpret the signs, even when they seem bothersome or irrational, are the ones who make it through the door of survival. And before we go any further, I want you to record this moment in the comments. He writes, "That makes sense to me." I want to see who also understands that, like that family, we all carry moments in which we need to cross our own doors of escape, so as not to be suffocated by the silence of a truth that can no longer be hidden. Time seemed to have slowed down, as if the universe was holding its breath for an instant that separated life from destruction. The family had just crossed the threshold when a deep sound, almost like the roar of a sleeping giant, reverberated through the walls of the house. A second later, the explosion happened. It was so sudden and violent that the ground shook under their feet. The glass shattered in all directions, throwing out luminous fragments as if they were small broken stars. The walls shook and began to crumble, releasing heavy blocks that crumbled in slow motion before the astonished eyes of the family. An orange flash lit up the night, swallowing the darkness as if the sky itself had caught fire. The flames rose, fast, furious, as if they were already lurking, waiting only for a signal to take possession of everything. The deafening noise of the explosion echoed through the street, breaking the tranquility of neighbors who until then rested in their homes. Doors opened, windows flew open, and frightened gazes turned to that apocalyptic scenario unfolding before them. The mother, still holding the child tightly to her chest, could not contain the cry that escaped from her throat. It was a cry of dread, but also of relief to be outside, safe from the inferno that had set in inside the residence. The father, wide-eyed, kept one hand over his head, as if still trying to protect himself from invisible shrapnel. His lips moved without making a sound, repeating phrases that only made sense inside his mind. This could have been the end of us. That could have been the end of us. And the dog, the protagonist of that escape, stood before them, barking loudly, his body still tense, his hair bristling, as if to ensure that none of them would dare to turn back. He, too, was in shock, but his mission was accomplished. He had led his family out, he had resisted indifference, he had faced the silence of the night with the voice of its barking. Now, in the face of the flames that consumed the house, he stood firm like a guardian who closely observes what he fought against. The visual impact was overwhelming. The fire rose through the windows like living tongues, consuming curtains, furniture, memories. Photographs, toys, objects that carried stories were reduced to ashes in a matter of seconds. The heat was so intense, it forced the family to take a few steps back. And even at a distance, one could feel the heavy air, mixed with smoke and destruction, which invaded the lungs and brought the bitter taste of loss. But as the tragedy unfolded, there was a quiet revelation. They were alive. Nothing, absolutely nothing inside that house could be more valuable than the opportunity to still breathe, still touch each other, still look each other in the eye. The shock was real, but there was also an invisible gratitude hanging in the air. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because what we saw there was not just a physical explosion that destroyed a residence. It was also a symbolic explosion, capable of revealing hidden truths that we rarely see in the midst of comfort. That moment marked the definitive break between the false sense of security and the raw reality of life. How many times do we carry within us invisible gases, accumulated tensions, postponed situations, choices not made, until suddenly everything implodes? The explosion of that house is a powerful metaphor for accumulation. Nothing happens suddenly without a silent process. Just as gas has accumulated in rooms, ready to be activated by the slightest spark, we also accumulate unresolved emotions, postponed decisions, truths that we pretend not to hear. And at some point, life shows us that there is no longer any way to postpone. The spark arises, and what was hidden comes to light in a devastating way. But there is something transformative about it, because by surviving this destruction, the family not only preserved life, it also gained the opportunity to rebuild, to start over, to look at itself with new eyes. The impact of the explosion, painful as it was, brought with it the revelation that nothing is eternal, that everything can change in seconds, and that the only thing truly non-negotiable is existence itself. Behind the scenes of life, how often are we not forced to watch the destruction of something we believe to be essential, only to realize that what was essential, in fact, was the chance to continue? Fire consumes, but it also purifies. It eliminates excess, destroys what no longer has a function, makes room for the new. And this is one of the most uncomfortable truths. We often need to lose in order to understand the value of what we have. That dog, by barking insistently, was not only saving his family from a tragic end, he was leading them to an awakening. He showed that in the face of destruction there is still a choice. And this is a learning that extends beyond the dramatic scene, because we all face, at some point, internal or external explosions that change the course of our journey. The most curious thing is that even in the face of chaos, the human mind has a tendency to cling to what has been lost. The father, looking at the flames, thought about the furniture, documents, valuables that had been left behind. The mother, in turn, remembered the photographs stored in albums, the child's drawings attached to the refrigerator, the kitchen table where so many conversations had taken place. And for a moment, the pain of what was consumed by the fire almost overshadowed the gratitude for survival. But as she looked at the dog, still steady, alert, as if watching for danger, the mother realized that nothing mattered anymore. Everything could be rebuilt, remade, reinvented. Life offered a second chance, and that was greater than any material memory. This is the hidden truth that we often avoid facing. Only when everything seems to fall apart do we realize the strength of what remains standing. What remains are not walls, are not objects, are not external structures. What remains is the invisible connection between those who survived together. It is the courage of those who did not give up. It is the impact of a moment that changes forever the mentality of those who live it. And that's exactly what makes this scene so powerful. It shows us that sometimes destruction is the beginning of reconstruction. That chaos can be the starting point for a much deeper journey. That transformation is born when we have no choice but to look forward, because behind us there is nothing left to preserve. The family, now in shock before the flames, little did they know that that night would not only be remembered for the explosion that destroyed their home, but for the awakening that it would provoke in each of them. And deep down, perhaps this is the greatest revelation. Behind every tragedy there is the possibility of a new beginning, even when it seems impossible to see in the heat of the moment. And to seal this point, I want you to write there in the comments the phrase, "I'm on this journey too." Just like this family, we all go through internal or external explosions that force us to awaken, and recognizing this is the first step in turning the impact of destruction into fuel for new construction. The silence that came after the explosion seemed to carry a weight impossible to bear. It was as if suddenly all the noise in the world had been sucked into a deep void, leaving only that almost ghostly sound of ash falling, like a thin, silent rain. The impact of the destruction was there, a few feet away, turning what was once home into a heap of flames, crackles, and smoke. The family, still in shock, was slow to realize that no matter how frightening what they saw before their eyes, the most important detail remained untouched. They were alive. They breathed, they trembled, they wept, but they were whole, beyond the reach of the death that haunted the now destroyed walls. It was at that moment that emotion overcame any attempt at rationality. The father, always accustomed to being the foundation of the house, the one who rarely showed weakness, was the first to give in. Tears descended without permission, as if the body had decided for him that there was no room for pride in the face of such a revelation. He grabbed his wife and daughter in a tight, almost suffocating embrace, as if he wanted to sew their skin to his, ensuring that they would never be separated again. The mother, already collapsed in tears, pressed the child to her chest with such force that she seemed to fear that if she loosened her arms, something invisible would tear her away from there. The little girl cried without understanding the full dimension of what was happening, but with the instinctive awareness that this moment was a watershed. And then, at the center of that human embrace, emerged the link that had made it all possible. The dog, panting, his chest rising and falling at a frantic pace, still stared fixedly at the burning house. His eyes shone in the reflection of the flares, not from fear but from wakefulness. It was like saying, "I've done my duty, but I still can't relax." Only when his mother, with trembling hands, pulled him into the circle of arms and tears did he allow himself to give in. The animal snuggled up, letting human warmth envelop it, and in that simple gesture the family understood that it was not just hugging a dog. I was embracing the true savior of that night. The father stroked his head, repeating almost disconnected words, a whisper between sobs. "You saved us, my friend, you saved us." The mother said that she would never again doubt his instinct, that she would never again ignore his barking, his signals, his warnings. The child, his face still wet with tears, hung around his neck as one embraces an invisible hero. There, amid the flames and smoke, the hidden truth was revealed with crystal clarity. If it were not for the dog, there would be no cry of relief, only eternal silence. And this revelation transformed everything. That animal, until then seen as a companion, as part of the routine, now became a guardian. He wasn't just a dog. It was the fine line between life and death, the messenger who had shouted when no one wanted to hear, the living symbol that courage does not depend on size, on words, on titles. Courage is acting when everyone hesitates. It is insisting when everyone ignores. It is putting yourself between danger and those you love, even without understanding all the consequences. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because this scene speaks not only of tears of relief after the tragedy. She talks about transformation, about how one instant is able to redesign the mindset of a lifetime. How many times do we not live believing that what we have is solid, that tomorrow will be the same as today, that nothing will tear us out of our comfort zone? And suddenly there comes an explosion, sometimes real, sometimes metaphorical, that destroys in seconds everything that seemed unshakable. This is exactly what happened to this family. In an instant, they understood that life is not in the walls, nor in the furniture, nor in the accumulation of things. Life is in the embrace, in the bond, in the ability to recognize that what really matters cannot be replaced. Behind the scenes that morning, it wasn't just the house that was ablaze, it was also the old perception of security that was unraveling. Each crack of the crumbling walls represented the collapse of an old mentality, that of believing that there will always be time, that signs can be ignored, that tomorrow is guaranteed. The fire burned the physical structure, but it also illuminated an inner revelation, that life is urgent, and that the signals we receive, whether they be a dog's bark, forebodings, annoyances, or discomforts, are often the invitations to a transformation that can no longer be delayed. That's why the collective hug scene is so powerful, because it reminds us that deep down everything we need can be summed up in what we can carry in our arms at the moment of escape. The rest is detail, it is noise, it is the illusion of permanence. And the family understood this viscerally. They wept not for the ruined house, but for the awareness that they had been given a second chance. And it's that kind of impact that forever changes the way you see the world. The dog, still in the center of that circle, breathed heavily, as if he had shouldered the responsibility of all salvation. And, in a way, it had really charged. He did not wait for orders, did not make calculations, did not stop to analyze probabilities, he just acted. And by acting, he showed that decisions are often not about certainties but about courage. This is the hidden truth we so often choose to ignore, that, in the end, waiting for absolute security is tantamount to accepting defeat. The hero is the one who decides even without knowing if it will work out. As the fire consumed what was left of the house, the family knew that something inside them was also burning. And that wasn't a negative. It was the destruction of the old mentality, the fall of the masks, the revelation that living for real requires recognizing the signs and acting on time. With every tear they shed, they not only mourned what had been lost but celebrated what remained, the bond, the courage, the chance to start over. And here is an even deeper metaphor. We all have, at some point in life, our own savior dog. Sometimes it's a person, sometimes it's an experience, sometimes it's just a repetitive nuisance that insists on taking us out of comfort. But we don't always recognize it right away. We often ignore, resist, try to silence what insists on alerting us, until the explosion happens, and only then we understand that we should have listened from the very beginning. This scene is a visceral reminder that we need to value signals even when they annoy, because the nuisance is often the bark of life calling us to wake up. And ignoring this call can cost too much. The dog did not give up on the family even when it was ignored. He insisted, and it was this insistence that saved everyone. The mother, still sobbing, repeated softly that she would never again treat the dog as just an animal. For her, he had become the real guardian angel. The father, hugging the two, looked at the dog with a mixture of reverence and gratitude. The child, even without fully understanding, knew that he would never forget that night. They were facing a watershed, and they knew it. What was left now was not only to deal with the material loss, but with the new consciousness that had been born. Because from that moment on, every decision, every choice, every gesture would be touched by the memory of what they lived. The fire destroyed walls, but built a new worldview, and ultimately, this was perhaps the most important transformation. And before we move on, I want you to leave in the comments a phrase that symbolizes this understanding. He says, "I'm on this journey too." Because in one way or another, we have all had moments when life has forced us to wake up in the middle of the night, between tears and revelations, to find out what really matters. Neighbors began to walk out the doors with faltering steps, some still in their pajamas, others clutching blankets over their shoulders as if in need of extra protection against the dawn that suddenly had teeth. The flash of the flames tinged the street facades with orange, and the smoke rose thickly, drawing in the sky a warning that no one in that small town would soon forget. At first there was the silent fright, that instant when one tries to understand the incomprehensible. Then came the murmurs, the whispered, "My God," the questions that could not be answered. The family, embraced, still trembled, and in the center of the human circle that formed, the dog looked at each face as if it were verified, all alive, all here. Someone ran around the corner and returned with a chemical powder extinguisher. Another called the fire department and the police. A neighbor brought water, not to extinguish the flames, which by this time was already a task for professionals, but to calm trembling hands, refresh dry throats, wash children's eyes. The dog, panting, allowed himself to be touched. He did not retreat when someone passed his hand over his head. He only kept vigil, attentive to any movement, as if danger could turn around. It was in this choreography of improvised care that the first label appeared, born of genuine amazement. "It is the angel of the dawn," said the lord of the house next door, his voice broken. And the nickname caught on at the same speed with which the flares burst windows. Firefighters arrived with the urgency of those who know the weight of the watch. The jets of water drew luminous arcs. The noise of the engines created a new kind of silence, the one in which confidence displaces panic. Our sergeant approached, listened to the story, examined the door and the cracks, asked technical questions, looked at the dog, and nodded with a respect that said more than any formal compliment. "If you had turned on a light," he commented, leaving in the air a hidden truth that chilled everyone's skin. The interval between life and the end fell on the gesture of not pressing a switch. The news began to spread even before the smoke cleared. A teenage girl filmed it from afar. The video won neighborhood message boards, jumped on public profiles, crossed the invisible border between neighborhood and city. Soon, the bakery's phone was ringing with people asking if it was true that a dog had woken the family up seconds before the explosion. The market girl confirmed. The bus driver commented on the 6 o'clock line. A local broadcaster opened the program with the phrase that would be repeated for the next few days. The angel of the dawn saved an entire house. And it wasn't just curiosity that spread. It was also a willingness to help. A boy who barely knew his family began a list of donations. Within hours, blankets, children's clothing, a borrowed crib, a box of basic kitchen utensils appeared. The owner of the lumberyard offered some boards for what came next. The teacher at the child's school sent a message assuring her that she would take care of the reception when she returned to class. Solidarity formed an immediate bridge over the chasm left by the explosion. And it wasn't just curiosity that spread, it was also a willingness to help. A boy who barely knew his family began a list of donations. Within hours, blankets, children's clothing, a borrowed crib, a box of basic kitchen utensils appeared. The owner of the lumberyard offered some boards for what came next. The teacher at the child's school sent a message assuring her that she would take care of the reception when she returned to class. Solidarity formed an immediate bridge over the chasm left by the explosion. And through the middle of this bridge walked the dog, not understanding the terms kitty, reconstruction or reportage, but understanding in his own way that the climate had changed. Now humans smiled at him with a different glow. Across the street, a lady who raises medicinal plants brought a damp cloth with crumpled leaves, saying it calmed her breathing. The mother thanked her, leaned her face against the fresh fabric, and for a moment let the body remember what it is like to rest. The father, still with the smell of smoke clinging to his clothes, repeated to anyone who would listen the detail across the street. A lady who raises medicinal plants brought a damp cloth with crumpled leaves, saying it calmed her breathing. The mother thanked her, leaned her face against the fresh fabric, and for a moment let the body remember what it is like to rest. The father, still with the smell of smoke clinging to his clothes, repeated to anyone who would listen the details of the escape, as if reconstructing the sequence of events was the only way to consolidate the miracle. With each report, the figure of the dog grew, the insistent barking, the paw on the door, the tug on the blanket, the rush to the exit. It was as if, in narrating, he sewed up his own memory so that it would not fall apart. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this repercussion is not just the spreading of an exciting story. It is the portrait of how a community recognizes itself in the mirror of a crisis. There, in a few blocks, what is often hidden behind the scenes was exposed. The collective capacity for transformation. The mentality that in everyday life is distracted. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this repercussion is not just the spreading of an exciting story. It is the portrait of how a community recognizes itself in the mirror of a crisis. There, in a few blocks, what is often hidden behind the scenes was exposed. The collective capacity for transformation. The mentality that in everyday life is distracted was called to make quick decisions, to do what is essential without someone having to send. When one group mobilizes for something that matters, the preservation of life, the explicit courage, the chance to start over, the entire city changes its stance. Suddenly, we're not just residents, we're each other's guardians. The angel of the dawn became a topic of conversation in the bank queue, in the barbershop, at coffee tables. It became an example in Sunday sermons and an analogy in teachers' meetings. A therapist in the neighborhood wrote a short text about instinct and care, remembering that sometimes salvation comes through non-ratio. The angel of the dawn became a topic of conversation in the bank queue, in the barbershop, at coffee tables. It became an example in Sunday sermons and an analogy in teachers' meetings. A therapist in the neighborhood wrote a short text about instinct and care, remembering that sometimes salvation comes through non-rational ways. The chronicle has been shared dozens of times. Her feed vendor showed up with a generous bag of gratitude. The vet offered a thorough checkup. The print shop proposed printing some pictures of the dog for a thank you mural. And every gesture, no matter how small, helped rewrite the meaning of that fire. Not just loss, but revelations. Not just ruin, but impact that rearranges priorities. In the midst of this current, the family began to breathe with another rhythm. There was still the fright stuck to the skin. There were still unanswered questions. There was still the emptiness of things that had turned grey, but a sharper perception was already emerging. When everything collapses, what sustains is invisible. The child drew with half-worn pencils the dog in front of a huge heart and pasted the drawing on the door. Within the midst of this current, the family began to breathe with another rhythm. There was still the fright stuck to the skin. There were still unanswered questions. There was still the emptiness of things that had turned grey, but a sharper perception was already emerging. When everything collapses, what sustains is invisible. The child drew with half-worn pencils the dog in front of a huge heart and pasted the drawing on the door of the temporary shelter where they would spend the night. The mother accepted the coat offered by a neighbor, and when she put it on, she felt something like an extended hug. The father, who always preferred to solve everything himself, found that sometimes the wisest decision is to allow help to come. The city sent a team to assess the surroundings and avoid risks to neighbors. A technician patiently explained how the gas behaves, why it is treacherous, how it seeps into corners without asking for permission. Technical words took on a different temperature in light of recent experience. There no one listened, as if they were passing the time. Everyone listened, as if they were updating there. The city sent a team to assess the surroundings and avoid risks to neighbors. A technician patiently explained how the gas behaves, why it is treacherous, how it seeps into corners without asking for permission. Technical words took on a different temperature in light of recent experience. There no one listened as if they were passing the time. Everyone listened as if they were updating their own security mentality. And inevitably, the coach would look at the dog and smile, as if the class had a four-legged co-instructor. The episode also opened up discussions the city had been putting off. The liquidator of a small condominium suggested overhauling the premises. The school combined a thematic week on domestic prevention. The radio announced a new framework with practical guidelines. Some may say that it is natural. When something serious happens, everyone is attentive. But there was something else. The sense that the hidden truth, the fragility of our routines, had been exposed not to paralyze us, but to push the collective journey toward more responsible decisions. That night, when the flames had already been tamed and the embers shone like sad constellations on the rubble, a wheel formed around the family. It was not vigil nor feast, it was presence. Someone told a childhood story in which a dog had prevented a child from getting lost in the woods. Another recalled the avalanche of letters he received after an accident. These narratives emerge when pain softens the shell of everyday life and lets the revelations pass. Everyone has a piece of light saved up to lend to their neighbor when it suddenly gets dark. The nickname was no longer just a nice label, it had become identity. The angel of the dawn began to circulate naturally, as if it had always belonged to the dog. The child repeated proudly, and he bowed his head, not understanding why people smiled so much when they called him that. From time to time, the father stopped talking and simply rested his forehead on the animal's head, in a silent gesture of gratitude. The mother, between one appointment and another, stroked her chest and felt her heart return to a less disordered rhythm. And because every repercussion also creates expectations, there were those who suggested an official tribute. A little ceremony, maybe, a certificate, a picture on the wall of the community center. The family did not seek glory, and the dog would not know what to do with it, but there was a symbolic value there to turn memory into a beacon so that others, upon hearing the story, would adjust their own routes. Tributes like this do not feed vanities, they feed mentalities. Between sirens that moved away and footsteps that dispersed, the dawn was giving way to a timid clarity. The sky, still smoky, opened in pale tones. The city breathed, tired, but awake. And the family, glued to the dog, understood that the journey did not end at that point. It began there one after another that would require other decisions, other gestures, another type of courage, the courage to rebuild without losing what the night had taught. All around, the neighboring houses still exuded the bittersweet mixture of fear and freshly brewed coffee. Someone insisted that they enter just a little to warm up, and the dog went along, obedient, as one who escorts a treasure. At the table, 4 cups, a plate with plain bread, and that conversation that drives away ghosts. You are here, and this is what matters. Outside, the scene of the fire still ached. Inside, a small care society stood, cell by cell. And if the whole city now repeated history, it was not only for the spectacle of the flames, but for what burned inside each one, the certainty that life is fine, and that, for this very reason, it is worth living with attention, with presence, with respect to the signs that nudge us before the collapse. The angel of the dawn became a meeting point, a password of belonging. It was not a question of creating a myth, but of legitimizing what it symbolized. Instinct, loyalty, action. There were still questions floating around, emotions in disarray, practical lists to sort out. But in the meantime, a city recognized itself in the gesture of an animal and decided, albeit without an audience, to adjust its own posture. And it is in this adjustment, almost imperceptible, that the great collective transformations live. Less speech, more care. Less distraction, more listening. Less shame to ask for help, more willingness to offer. For the family, the night had been a portal. To the neighborhood, a call. For the dog, only the continuity of a love that does not calculate. And since every call leaves a trace, the story moved on, ready for new layers, new details, new marks that, when well read, prevent tragedies and multiply courage. He said, "That makes sense to me." At that moment, when the city was still whispering what had happened, the message spread far beyond the burned walls of a house. It wasn't just an exciting story to fill the local news. It was, at that moment when the city was still whispering what had happened, the message SPR. This scene reveals something that we ignore in the fast pace of everyday life. We are so busy planning and controlling that we stop listening to the signals. A dog, speechless, was able to perceive a threat that no one noticed. Their pure loyalty teaches that heroism does not need titles or medals. Sometimes it manifests itself in firm paws, attentive eyes, and barking that refuses to be silenced. And here the reflection arises. How many invisible gases are there in our lives? Not just the physical ones, but the ones that seep into the mind and heart. A habit that seems harmless, a toxic relationship, a delayed decision that undermines the future. They are silent fires that advance until they explode. Just like that dawn, many times we already have signs next to us that warn us, but we choose to ignore. This story, then, is not just about a dog saving a family, but about the need to recognize the warnings before it's too late. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the central question is, what prevents us from perceiving the signs? Often it is the internal noise, the conditioned mentality that binds us to superficial worries. We are so used to demanding rational explanations that we despise the value of an intuition, of a discomfort, of a feeling that something is not right. But great transformations happen when we learn to respect these signs. The dog had no time for doubts, he just trusted his instinct. Perhaps what we lack is precisely this courage, to act before reason paralyzes us. This story also shows that heroes are not only in the headlines or on movie screens. They live behind the scenes of life, in the friend who calls at the right time, in the word that comes like balm, in the hand that keeps someone from falling. These are the angels of the dawn, who in different ways protect against invisible dangers. And if we look closely, we will see that we can also occupy this place, for others and for ourselves, as long as we choose to listen and act. After that night, nothing for the family would be like before. The trauma made room for a new mindset. What was once an automatic routine has become an opportunity for gratitude. The bills, the commitments, the hassles have lost weight in the face of the revelation that everything can change in seconds. Each hug became longer, each word gained more value, each look began to carry consciousness. The dog, now remembered as a hero, has become a symbol of what really matters: presence, loyalty, courage. And if dogs can feel and act at critical moments, what does this say about us? Perhaps we have forgotten to use tools that we already have: intuition, sensitivity, instinct. We let them atrophy in the constant noise of distractions. This story reminds us that even in a technological world, nothing replaces the connection with what we feel. Often, what saves is not what we know, but what we can sense. When the broadcaster called the dog the Angel of the Dawn, he did not just come up with a poetic title. It revealed something bigger. We all need an angel like that. Sometimes it appears in the form of a person, sometimes of unexpected situation, sometimes of courage hidden in ourselves. The question is, are we willing to recognize when this angel barks at our door? Or are we going to wait for the walls to collapse and only then realize that the signs were there all along? It's an uncomfortable but necessary question, because unlike that family, many continue to sleep while the invisible accumulates. They ignore the alerts because they don't come packaged the way they'd like. But when we wake up, we understand. Nothing is more precious than life and the bonds that sustain us. This is the transformation that is born of the avoided loss, of the tear of relief, of the revelation that reorganizes the soul. This story echoes because it speaks not only of a saved family, but of our own ability to awaken. Awakening is a choice. Decide to listen more, act sooner, trust what we feel. Decide to value those who walk beside us, whether human or animal, because often it is from this simple bond that salvation arises. This is the journey we are all living, learning to recognize the signs, respect the instincts, and transform pain into wisdom. If we carry this lesson into everyday life, we will be more prepared to face the invisible dangers that haunt the routine. In the end, heroes always show up, but it's up to us to listen to them. Write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." The dog that woke up his family seconds before the explosion not only saved lives, but also proved how irreplaceable our four-legged friends are. It was not just an isolated heroic act, but a gesture that revealed something much greater, the depth of the connection between human beings and animals, a silent link that manifests itself in moments of crisis when everything seems about to fall apart. This scene, etched in the memory of the family and the community, goes beyond the story of a rescue. It's a visceral reminder that true bonds don't need words, only presence, instinct, and surrender. And perhaps this is precisely where the beauty of this revelation lies, in the contrast between human fragility in the face of danger and the unshakable courage of a being who, without expecting anything in return, puts himself as a shield against death. When the family hugged that dog, they weren't just celebrating the fact that they were alive. I was also recognizing the hidden truth that we so often ignore. Life always offers us signs, always gives us chances to perceive the invisible, but we almost never pay attention. Insistent barking, which at first seemed only bothersome, turned into the dividing line between tragedy and survival. It is in this detail that the story finds its strength, because it exposes how much our decisions and perceptions can change the entire course of a journey. How often, in our own ways, do we ignore warnings, stifle intuition, and let routine swallow the sensitivity that could save us? This episode also highlights how courage is not restricted to great human feats. Heroism often reveals itself in simple, instinctive gestures, almost invisible to eyes accustomed to seeking greatness. And it is precisely in simplicity that we find the deepest lessons. That dog did not hesitate, did not calculate risks, did not need time to think about consequences. He just felt, realized, and acted. This is one of the greatest revelations that history gives us, the importance of listening to what is beyond logic, of trusting something greater than immediate reasoning, because in the end, it is these quick, intuitive, and courageous choices that often decide between life and death, between the end and the continuation of a journey. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the impact of this scene does not end with the saved family or the destroyed house. It expands like waves in a lake after a stone falls. Each person who heard the story of that dog came to see the world differently. In the community, the case has gone from being just a curiosity to becoming a symbol. The Angel of the Dawn, as they called him, was not just a four-legged hero. It was a mirror that reflected how much we can all be instruments of transformation in the lives of others. His courage raised a silent question in every resident. What if it were with me? Would I have the courage to act? Would I be attentive to the signs, or would I let the invisible consume me? And this is where the great reflection lives. Each of us carries within himself this ability to hear, to perceive, to move before it is too late. But to do this, it is necessary to break the conditioned mentality that insists on seeking absolute guarantees before acting. The truth is that we will never have all the answers. We will never be completely sure. And yet, we need to decide. The dog did not wait for the danger to be confirmed, did not wait for evidence. He just followed the instinct, and with it he changed the fate of an entire family. How many lives could be transformed if we learned to do the same in our own battles? This story also brings us to an often overlooked topic, the power of invisible relationships. Because it was not just a dog that saved people. It was a bond of trust built day after day, in small gestures of affection, in silent looks that said more than 1,000 words. It was this bond that made the family hear, even at the last moment, the call that would lead them off the path of death. And this revelation is transformative. In the end, it is not possessions, it is not titles, it is not material achievements that define who survives the storms. It's the ties, it's the connections. They are the bonds that sustain us when everything falls apart. What is striking is to realize how such a dramatic scene can become a source of collective inspiration. The impact of that night was not restricted to the family's address. It echoed through the city, crossed invisible borders, and reached even hearts that had never witnessed the fire. Because deep down, we all carry a common desire: to be remembered, to be recognized, to be able to protect what we love. The dog just showed in a raw and true way that this is possible. And in doing so, it has become a symbol of fidelity, of courage, and of a truth that can no longer be forgotten. This is the kind of journey that transforms mindsets, because from the moment we look at this story, we can no longer ignore the signs that life gives us. We learn that just like that family, we can also be one step away from the end without realizing it. We learn that heroes can emerge from where we least expect them, and we understand that in the end, the greatest value is not in what we possess, but in what we are able to feel, perceive, and protect. This is the essence that makes our four-legged friends irreplaceable. They not only live with us, they become guardians of what we hold most precious. And that is why this story echoes so much within each of us, because she doesn't just talk about a dog that saved lives. She talks about our own need to awaken to the invisible, to trust our instincts more, to value the bonds that sustain our existence. And if we can carry this lesson into everyday life, we will not only be honoring the memory of that heroic act, but also cultivating within ourselves the courage to act, the sensitivity to listen, and the loyalty to remain faithful to what really matters. He said, "That makes sense to me. After all this, if you have come this far with me, you have already realized that this space is more than telling stories. It is creating connections that make sense, that touch deep and awaken something within us. If this content has brought value to you, subscribe to the channel to continue following this journey with me. So with each new video, we continue to build together this community that believes in the power of stories and the impact they can generate. And also leave your comment below, writing, "I'm with you until the end." I want to see who really walked with me to that last word. This simple gesture shows how connected we are here and makes all the difference in keeping this exchange alive. Oh, and already take the opportunity to leave the like, not as a favor, but as a sign that this message has found space within you. It is this return that gives me strength to continue bringing content that really makes sense. And look, no need to stop here. There is a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there. I'm sure it will make even more sense to you.